Minister, can you provide an update on the specific amount of capital funding allocated to the HEIs to deliver the student accommodation as was agreed by Cabinet this week? And I understand that you're unlocking 667 of the over 3,000 units that are shelved. Can you confirm that the money made available is 32 million and that it will provide a grant of 48,000 per unit? And can you guarantee, Minister, that all of those units will be affordable for ordinary working families? Thank you.
Thanks very much to Deputy Conway-Walsh for the question. Yes, the Deputy is correct. The government decision this week does allocate an additional €32 million to HEIs for the provision of, as she says, 667 additional units, and they're in, as the Deputy probably knows, they're in Maynooth, in Galway and in Limerick, and I can come back on some of those details in a moment. But my department has been engaging intensively in examining issues in relation to student accommodation in the context both of the overall pressures within the general residential retail market, which are posing significant difficulties for students, and indeed the escalation in building costs, which had slowed or in some cases stopped the construction of purpose-built student accommodation by publicly funded higher education institutions. Earlier this year I established a dedicated unit for student accommodation in my department and received endorsement from the Cabinet Committee on Housing to rapidly explore measures that might be able to assist. A dual-track approach has been adopted through a concentration in the short term on the small number of institutions where planning permission is in place and plans, though stalled, are at an advanced stage. Meanwhile, wider planning is also being initiated in order that a broader range of project options can be developed and considered next year. At the government meeting this week, I received endorsement on the proposed overall approach and specific approval in relation to the 3 projects that I've referenced. The approach adopted will see the state assist with the cost of building student accommodation so as to ensure increased availability and promote greater access, in particular for priority student groups identified in the National Access Plan, which was published in August. At the heart of the new policy is promotion of the delivery of student accommodation and the provision of resources. Government has agreed to short-term activation plans to stimulate the supply of affordable accommodation. The immediate priority is to deliver on projects where planning permission already exists but where developments have not proceeded. Support for 3 proposals is being made in respect to the University of Limerick, Maynooth University and the University of Galway, and this proposal could deliver up to 700 additional beds. These are in addition to the 1,190 additional beds delivered this year or on track for delivery in 2023, and in addition we're continuing to engage with the other institutions who have full planning permission that the Deputy refers to.
Thank you, Minister. If you could as well, and I do welcome it, I welcome the approach because we wanted to have this approach for so long in terms of there being an investment and recognising that student accommodation is integral to access to 3rd level, particularly for students from rural areas who absolutely they can't go to college without having accommodation. But a decade of underinvestment in higher education has left us with this chronic lack of student accommodation. And the plan to part fund only 667 student beds doesn't go far enough, I think, because the extent of the problem, particularly in the last 12 months, but indeed for years, and because of that chronic underinvestment in the 3rd level thing, I think we have an accumulation there to address, and it doesn't reflect the scale and the severity of the housing emergency. And as you said, Minister, we know that there are over 3,000 student beds on the shelf sitting due to the lack of government support. I want to ask you as well, DCU have 990 additional beds with planning permission since 2019. That's a significant number of beds in the Dublin area, and this needs to be the first step in what you're doing here. And I want to see what other progress we can expect in that area. But I kind of want to have a timeline. So for students who are really in a dire situation now for student accommodation, when will that accommodation be available, the money that was made available?
So firstly, I welcome the Deputy's welcome, and I do think there was a political consensus in this House that the state should intervene in providing funding to build college-owned student accommodation. We might have different views, but I think there was a general consensus across the House that needed to happen. That is now happening. I would I'd actually contend, if it doesn't sound too peculiar, to say that it's actually probably wrong to nearly focus on the 667, right? It's great that those 667 are unlocked in Maynooth, in Galway and Limerick. I thank those three institutions. They'll now proceed. They'll go to construction in 2023. I genuinely think the bigger win this week for student accommodation is that there's now a policy and a mechanism for the state to intervene. And I want to absolutely assure Deputy Conway-Walsh that we are intensively engaging with DCU and with UCD, and they with us, to see if we can move their projects forward. So there's 5 universities with active planning, 3 over the line, 2 that we're engaging, and we've provided, which I know will be close to your own heart, €1 million to the technological universities this week for them to put their plans in place to benefit from a similar scheme in 2023. So it's a new policy approach that I think is the most significant element.
Yeah, I agree in terms of the policy approach. Absolutely, it should have been done many, many years ago, in my opinion. But what I want to make sure is that all of those units are affordable, because what I don't want happening is that X number of units are delivered and that then so many of them are beyond the reach of students. I think that would be we'd be in a worse situation if we end up like that. So the devil will be in the detail in terms of the contracts and the contracts and the agreements that are signed between the HEIs and the government to make sure that students and families who are really suffering right now in terms of cost of living crisis and in terms of the housing crisis, that their needs will be met in that it won't be the needs of people who are trying to make money on the back of hard-pressed students and families. So I want to know how many are affordable, and just in terms, I suppose, of that being delivered to the houses. So if it's going to construction in 2023, we're looking at 24, 25. I mean, it is quite a bit into the future as well, and that's why I think there needs to be an absolute urgency around this to get the student accommodation situation addressed. People are really concerned, even students who are going to be starting next September, never mind the ones who are in a really precarious situation this year. Thank you.
So I think there's 2 elements. I think everybody benefits from extra supply. So if you take Maynooth University, for example, we know that for every 1 person who got a student accommodation bed on campus this year, there were 6 applications. So we actually know, even at current market rates, there is demand for more. But to be clear, what we're funding here are not for profit. So we're funding here publicly funded institutions to deliver student accommodation that has to wash its face, but not student accommodation seeking to make profit. And every cent that the taxpayer invests will have to see a return in terms of affordability measures. That means below market rents. I accept there is detail to be worked through. You are right. I mean, on the construction, these are projects that will go to construction in 2023. But we do have to break the cycle. We can't just look at this September to September. We have to actually take a new policy initiative that will begin to improve things. But there are other student accommodation beds coming on stream, for example, 674 in Galway that are due to be completed in January that will be available for students in September, as one example separate to this.